The cafeteria fell silent as Marcus Thompson crawled on all fours across the sticky linoleum floor, his face burning with humiliation. Around him, smartphones captured every degrading second as he let out a series of pathetic barks, just as the bullies had demanded. What none of them knew, not the laughing students, not the sneering bullies, not even the teachers who turned their backs, was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks earlier, Riverside High buzzed with the usual Monday morning chaos. Students clustered around lockers, trading weekend stories and last-minute homework answers. The autumn air carried the scent of fresh pencil shavings and industrial floor cleaner, mixing with the distant aroma of cafeteria breakfast burritos. Principal Janet Morrison stood in her office window, watching the familiar dance of teenage social dynamics play out in the courtyard below. Her secretary knocked gently on the doorframe. "Mrs. Morrison, the exchange student is here for his orientation." She turned to see a lanky 17-year-old boy standing awkwardly in the doorway. Marcus Thompson didn't look like much average height. Slightly hunched shoulders, thick-rimmed glasses that had seen better days. His clothes were clean but clearly not expensive. A plain blue polo shirt, khaki pants that were a size too big, and worn sneakers that had probably been white once upon a time. "Welcome to Riverside High, Marcus," Principal Morrison said with practiced warmth. "How are you settling in with the Patterson family?" Marcus shifted his weight nervously. "They're really nice, ma'am. Mrs. Patterson made me pancakes this morning." His voice carried a slight accent, something rural, maybe Midwestern. "I've never had pancakes with blueberries before." The principal smiled genuinely this time. The exchange program often brought students from challenging backgrounds, and Marcus's file had been particularly sobering. His parents had died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving him in the care of an elderly grandmother in rural Montana. When she became too ill to care for him, the state had arranged for him to finish his senior year through the exchange program. "Well, I'm sure you'll find plenty of new experiences here in California. Riverside High has over 2,000 students, so it might feel overwhelming at first. Your host family lives in one of our nicer neighborhoods, so you'll be riding the bus with some of our more privileged students." Marcus nodded, though something flickered in his eyes that Principal Morrison couldn't quite read. "Yes, ma'am. I'm used to adapting." The morning bell chimed through the hallways, and soon Marcus found himself navigating the maze of corridors with his schedule clutched tightly in his hand. First period, a P literature with Mrs. Chun. He slipped into the classroom just as the final bell rang, drawing brief glances from his new classmates. "You must be our exchange student," Mrs. Chun said kindly. "Class, we have Marcus Thompson joining. U.S. from Montana. Marcus, please take any open seat." The only available desk was in the front row, directly in front of a girl with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes. As Marcus settled in, he heard her whisper to her friend, "Great. Another charity case." "Did you see those shoes?" Her friend giggled softly. "I heard he's staying with the Pattersons. They're always taking in strays." Marcus kept his eyes forward, his face carefully blank. He'd heard worse. In Montana, kids had called him orphan, boy, and trailer trash, even though he'd never lived in a trailer. Here, at least, the insults came with a California accent. Mrs. Chun began discussing the symbolism in The Great Gatsby, and Marcus found himself genuinely engaged. Literature had always been an escape for him, a way to disappear into other worlds when his own became too heavy to bear. He raised his hand tentatively. "Yes, Marcus?" "I think Gatsby's green light represents more than just hope," he said quietly. "It's about the impossibility of recapturing the past, but also the dangerous delusion that money can buy authenticity." The room fell silent. Several students exchanged surprised glances. The blonde girl in front of him turned around with raised, Eyebrows. Wow, that's actually not terrible, she said with mild surprise. I'm Savannah Wells, by the way. Marcus, he replied, though she already knew. Where in Montana are you from? Like, is there even civilization there? Before Marcus could answer, a voice from the back of the room cut through the conversation. Yo, Montana! Have you ever seen a building taller than a barn before? Laughter rippled through the classroom. Marcus turned to see a tall, muscular boy with perfectly styled dark hair smirking at him. This had to be one of the school's athletes. Everything about him screamed confidence and entitlement. That's enough, Dylan, Mrs. Chun said firmly. Let's get back to Fitzgerald. But Dylan Rodriguez wasn't finished. As the star quarterback and son of a prominent local businessman, he was used to being the center of attention. I'm just curious about our new friend's background. I bet they don't even have Wi-Fi where he's from. More laughter. Marcus felt his face grow warm, but he kept his expression neutral. In Montana, he'd learned that showing weakness only made things worse. Actually, Marcus said quietly, we had satellite internet. It was pretty reliable. Oh, satellite, Dylan said mockingly. How fancy. What about running water, indoor plumbing? Dylan Rodriguez, that's enough. Mrs. Chun's voice carried real authority now. Principal's office, now. Dylan gathered his things with exaggerated slowness, making sure to bump Marcus's desk as he passed. See you around, Montana, he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. After Dylan left the classroom, atmosphere shifted slightly. Some students looked embarrassed by their classmates' behavior, while others seemed disappointed that the entertainment was over. Marcus tried to focus on the lesson, but he could feel curious eyes on him throughout the period. When the bell rang, Savannah turned around again. Don't mind Dylan. He's kind of a jerk to everyone at first. You'll get used to it. Thanks, Marcus said, though he doubted it would be that simple. His next class was physics with Mr. Nguyen, followed by a P history. In each room, he endured similar introductions and sideways glances. By lunchtime, he was already exhausted. From being the object of constant curiosity, the cafeteria was a maze of social hierarchies made visible. Athletes dominated the center tables, their letterman jackets like uniforms marking their territory. Drama kids clustered near the windows, gesturing dramatically as they spoke. Honor students huddled over textbooks while picking at salads. And scattered throughout were smaller groups, representing various subcultures and interests. Marcus bought a simple turkey sandwich and looked for somewhere to sit. Most tables were clearly established friend groups with no room for outsiders. He finally spotted an empty table in the corner and headed toward it. Hey, Montana. He turned to see Dylan approaching with 3 other boys, all wearing the same confident smirk. These had to be his teammates. They moved with the easy swagger of people who'd never doubted their place in the world. Are you eating lunch all alone? That's kind of sad, Dylan said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Want to sit with us? Marcus hesitated. In his experience, invitations from bullies were rarely genuine. I'm okay here, thanks. Oh, come on. We want to get to know our new classmate better. Dylan's tone was friendly, but his eyes held a challenge. I'm Dylan Rodriguez, quarterback, team captain, basically the guy who runs this place. These are my boys, Jake Wilson, Brett Morgan, and Tyler Hayes. Each boy nodded as he was introduced. Jake was massive, easily 6'4", and built like a linebacker. Brett had the lean build of a runner, with cold blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything. Tyler was smaller than the others but carried himself with nervous energy, like a chihuahua trying to keep up with wolves. Really, I'm fine eating alone, Marcus said. I'm used to it. See, that's the problem, Dylan said, still wearing his false smile. Nobody should eat alone on their first day. It's just not right. We're going to help you make friends. Before Marcus could protest, Jake had lifted him by the arm gently, but with unmistakable strength. Come on, Montana. Dylan's trying to be nice. Marcus allowed himself to be guided to their table, knowing that resistance would only make things worse. Other students watched with interest, sensing drama in the making. So tell us about Montana, Dylan said once they were seated. What did you do for fun out there? Tip cows? Chase tumbleweeds? Mostly read, Marcus answered honestly. Helped my grandmother with her garden. Worked part-time at the hardware store. Worked? Brett leaned forward with interest. Like for money? Yeah, for money. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The four athletes exchanged glances. In their world, work was something other people did. Their parents provided everything they needed, and their athletic scholarships would take care of college. That's so ... Authentic, Tyler said, though he made it sound like a disease. Very blue collar. What about sports? Jake asked. You play football? Basketball? Marcus shook his head. Not really my thing. Wrestling? Dylan's question carried a strange undertone that Marcus couldn't identify. No, Marcus lied smoothly. Never wrestled. Another exchange of glances. Dylan's smile grew wider. That's too bad. Wrestling builds character, teaches you how to handle physical confrontation. He paused meaningfully. Some people think they're tough until they get on the mat. Marcus said nothing, taking a bite of his sandwich. The turkey was dry, but he chewed methodically, keeping his expression neutral. You know what? Dylan said suddenly, as if struck by inspiration. We should show you around the school properly. Give you the full Riverside High experience. That's okay, Marcus said quickly. I have a map. A map? Jake laughed, a booming sound that drew attention from other tables. Maps don't show you the important stuff. Like which bathrooms to avoid, which teachers are pushovers, where the best hiding spots are. Hiding spots? For when you need to disappear for a while, Brett explained with a meaningful look. Sometimes it's better to be invisible, you know? Marcus was beginning to understand that this conversation wasn't really about showing him around. These boys were predators, and they'd identified him as prey. The question was whether they'd strike now or wait until they had him alone. Listen, he said, standing up and gathering his lunch. I appreciate the offer, but I should probably get to my next class early. New student and all. Dylan's friendly mask slipped slightly. Sit down, Montana. We're not done talking. The command in his voice was unmistakable. Around them, other students pretended not to notice the tension, but Marcus could feel their attention. Like heat from a fire. Actually, I think we are done, Marcus said quietly. Thanks for lunch. He turned to leave, but Jake's massive hand landed on his shoulder. Dylan said, sit down. Marcus looked at the hand, then at Jake's face, then at the watching crowd. This was the moment, the test that would determine his place in the school's hierarchy. Back in Montana, he'd learned that bullies were like wild animals. They could smell fear, and once they caught that scent, they never stopped hunting. Please take your hand off me, Marcus said calmly. Jake squeezed harder. Or what, Montana? You'll do something about it. The cafeteria had gone noticeably quieter. Even students at distant tables were straining to see what would happen next. Marcus could see phones being subtly positioned to record whatever came next. I'm asking you nicely, Marcus said, his voice still level. Please let go. Dylan stood up, his face flushed with excitement. You heard him, Jake. He asked nicely. Maybe we should be nice back. Jake released Marcus's shoulder but stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. Sure, we can be nice. Montana here seems like a polite guy, very respectful. Respectful, Brett echoed. I like that in a person. Tyler giggled nervously. Yeah, respect is important. Dylan walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of Marcus. They were roughly the same height, But Dylan had 30 pounds of muscle on him and the confidence that came with years of athletic success. "You know what would be really respectful, Montana?" Dylan's voice had dropped to a whisper that somehow carried across the silent cafeteria. "If you showed us how much you appreciate our hospitality." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "How's that?" Dylan's smile was sharp as a knife. "Get on your hands and knees and bark like a dog." The words hit the cafeteria like a physical blow. Students gasped, some laughed nervously, others pulled out their phones more openly. This was the kind of moment that would be talked about for months, shared on social media, remembered long after graduation. Marcus stood perfectly still, his face showing nothing. Inside, however, something cold and dangerous was stirring, something he'd kept carefully controlled for 2 years. "That's not going to happen," he said quietly. "Oh, I think it is," Dylan replied. "See, this is how things work at Riverside High. New students need to learn their place. And your place, Montana, is at the bottom." Jake moved to Marcus's left, Brett to his right. Tyler positioned himself behind, completing the circle. They moved with practiced coordination. This wasn't their first time cornering someone. "Come on, don't make this harder than it needs to be," Dylan said with mock sympathy. "Just a couple of barks, maybe a little tail wagging, and we'll call it even. Think of it as initiation." Marcus looked around the circle of faces, then at the watching crowd. Some students looked horrified, others excited, most just curious to see how this would play out. Teachers were nowhere to be seen. They never were when things like this happened. "What if I refuse?" Marcus asked. Dylan's smile widened. "Then we'll have to get creative. Jake here is pretty good at helping people see reason." Jake cracked his knuckles meaningfully. "I prefer when they cooperate, but honestly, I don't mind either way." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of his grandmother's garden in Montana. She'd grown prize-winning roses despite the harsh climate, protecting them through brutal winters until they bloomed more beautifully than anyone thought possible. "Sometimes," she'd told him once, "you have to let the frost think it's winning before you show it what you're really made of." When he opened his eyes, Dylan was still smiling, still confident in his power. The quarterback had no idea that he was staring at someone who'd won 3 consecutive state wrestling championships, someone who'd been recruited by Division I colleges before his parents died and his world fell apart. But Marcus wasn't ready to show his true nature yet. Not here, not like this. He needed to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with before he revealed his capabilities. So he did something that went against every instinct he developed over years of training and competition. He got down on his hands and knees. On the dirty cafeteria floor, the crowd erupted. Phones appeared everywhere, recording every angle as Marcus Thompson, exchange student from Montana, barked like a dog in front of the entire school. Dylan stood over him, arms crossed, basking in his moment of triumph. Louder! Someone shouted from the crowd. "Make him roll over," called another voice. Marcus barked again, louder this time, feeling pieces of his dignity scatter like leaves in a harsh wind. But even as humiliation burned through him, he was learning. Watching. Planning. Delan Rodriguez had made his first mistake by targeting Marcus et al. His second mistake was thinking that this display of power would be the end of it. But his biggest mistake, the one that would cost him everything, was not realizing that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that let you think you're the hunter. As Marcus crawled across the cafeteria floor, barking on command while students laughed and recorded, he was already 3 moves ahead in a game that Dylan didn't even know had begun. The viral video reached 2 million views by midnight. Students shared it across every social platform, adding their own commentary and reactions. The hashtag #BarkingMontana trended locally on Twitter, and reaction videos started appearing on TikTok. Marcus Thompson had become Riverside High's newest internet sensation for all the wrong reasons. But while the school slept, Marcus was wide awake in his small bedroom at the Patterson house, doing something that would have shocked anyone who'd witnessed his cafeteria humiliation. He was training dot push dash-ups, sit-ups, and shadowboxing in complete silence. His movements were fluid and controlled, each exercise performed with the precision of someone who'd spent years perfecting their craft. When he moved through wrestling drills, shooting takedowns against an imaginary opponent, practicing escapes and reversals, there was no trace of the awkward, hunched boy who'd crawled across the cafeteria floor. Mrs. Patterson knocked softly on his door around midnight. "Marcus, are you okay, honey?" "I saw ... Well, I saw what happened online." Marcus stopped mid-exercise, sweat dripping from his forehead. "I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson. Just couldn't sleep." "That boy, Dylan Rodriguez, his father owns half the businesses in this town. But that doesn't give him the right to humiliate you like that." Her voice carried genuine anger. "I've already called the principal." "Please don't," Marcus said quickly. "I can handle this myself." There was a long pause. "Marcus, there's something you should know about this family. We've hosted 12 exchange students over the years, and every single one of them had to deal with bullies at some point. The difference is how they chose to respond." Marcus opened the door slightly. Mrs. Patterson was a small woman in her 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd been nothing but welcoming since his arrival, treating him like the son she'd never had. "What do you mean?" "Some kids tried to become invisible, hoping the bullies would lose interest. Others fought back and just made things worse. But the smartest won a girl from South Korea named Minji Waited. She learned everything about her tormentors before she struck back. When she finally acted, it was surgical, precise, devastating. More importantly, she was the only person in the cafeteria who hadn't looked at him with either pity or amusement. She'd simply glanced up when he sat down, nodded slightly, and returned to her book. Marcus was still observing Ashley when Dylan and his crew made their entrance. They moved through the cafeteria like sharks through a school of fish, other students automatically clearing a path. Today, Dylan wore his Letterman jacket despite the warm weather, a power move that reminded everyone of his status. Well, Dylan announced loudly as he approached Marcus's table. "If it isn't our favorite dog, how are you today, boy? Still know how to bark?" Laughter rippled through the nearby tables. Jake Wilson pulled out his phone, clearly hoping for a sequel to yesterday's viral moment. Marcus looked up slowly, his face carefully blank. "I'm fine, thanks." "That's good to hear." Dylan sat down uninvited, his teammates flanking him like bodyguards. "See, Jake here was telling me that you might be holding a grudge about yesterday. I told him that couldn't be right, that you understood we were just helping you find your place." "I understand," Marcus said quietly. "Good." Dylan's smile was bright and predatory. "Because today, we've got an even better learning opportunity for you." Brett Morgan leaned forward, his cold blue eyes glinting with anticipation. "See, some of the guys were saying that maybe yesterday was too easy. Maybe our new friend here needs more comprehensive introduction to Riverside high culture." "Tyler." Hayes giggled nervously. "Yeah, like a real initiation." Marcus felt that familiar cold stirring in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "What did you have in mind?" Dylan's grin widened. "Nothing too complicated. Just a little physical fitness test. See if farm life made you tough, or if you're as soft as you look." Around the cafeteria, conversations had stopped. Students were pretending to eat while straining to hear every word. Phones were being positioned discreetly, ready to capture whatever happened next. "I'm not really the athletic type," Marcus said, playing his role perfectly. "Oh, that's okay," Jake rumbled. "We'll start easy. Maybe just see if you can do 10 push-ups without crying. Or hold a plank for 30 seconds, Brett added. Simple stuff." Marcus knew this was escalating exactly as he'd expected. Bullies like Dylan never stopped with one victory. They kept pushing until their victim either broke completely or fought back. The question was when to reveal his hand. "I don't think I can do 10 push-ups," he said honestly. That wasn't a lie. He could do 10 one-handed push-ups, but that wasn't what they were asking. "Well, then maybe we need to help you build some character," Dylan said, standing up. "Come on, Montana. Let's go outside and see what you're made of." Marcus hesitated, playing the reluctant victim. "I don't want to. I wasn't asking," Dylan cut him off. The mask of false friendliness had dropped completely now. "Get up, now." The cafeteria was dead silent. Even the lunch ladies had stopped their work to watch the confrontation unfold. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the follow-up to yesterday's humiliation. Marcus stood slowly, his movements deliberate and uncertain. "Okay, but I really don't think I can. Shut up and walk," Jake growled, moving behind him to cut off any escape route. They filed out of the cafeteria like a bizarre parade, Dylan leading with confident swagger, his teammates surrounding Marcus like prison guards, and a growing crowd of students following at a safe distance. Teachers were nowhere to be seen. As usual when these situations developed, the courtyard was perfect for Dylan's purposes. Open, visible from multiple classroom windows, and far enough from the main building that any noise wouldn't immediately attract adult attention. Dylan positioned himself in the center like a ringmaster, arms spread wide. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the gathering crowd, "today we're going to help our exchange student friend discover his true potential." Nervous laughter scattered through the audience. Most students looked uncomfortable but excited, like people watching a car accident, horrified but unable to look away. Marcus stood in the center of the circle, shoulders hunched, looking every inch the terrified victim. Inside, however, he was cataloging everything. Dylan's stance, arrogant, unbalanced. Jake's positioning, too close, easy to exploit. Brett's nervous energy, overconfident, likely to make mistakes. And Tyler's obvious discomfort, weak link, potential ally if turned. "Okay, Montana," Dylan said, pulling off his Letterman jacket with theatrical flair. "Let's start simple. Give me 20 push-ups. If you can't do them, Jake here will help motivate you." Jake cracked his knuckles meaningfully. The sound echoed across the silent courtyard like gunshots. Marcus got down on his hands and knees, positioning himself carefully. To the watching crowd, he looked awkward and uncertain. In reality, he was preparing for what would happen next. He started the push-ups, deliberately making them look difficult. His form was intentionally poor, his breathing labored and artificial. By the 8th repetition, he was struggling visibly. "Come on, Montana," Dylan shouted. "Is that the best you can do? This is embarrassing." Marcus collapsed at the 10th push-up, breathing heavily. "I can't do any more," he gasped. "Pathetic," Brett sneered. "My little sister could do better than that." Dylan walked over and stood directly above Marcus, who was still on his hands and knees. "You know what, Montana? I don't think you're trying hard enough. I think you need some extra motivation." He placed his foot on Marcus's back, pushing down with just enough force to be degrading without causing real injury. The crowd gasped, and phones appeared openly now. This was crossing into serious bullying territory. "How does that feel?" Dylan asked loudly. "Does that motivate you to try harder?" Marcus stayed perfectly still, letting Dylan think he was completely dominating the situation. "Please," he said quietly. "I'm trying my best. Your best isn't good enough." Dylan pressed down. "Harder. Maybe if you bark again, I'll let you up. What do you think, everyone? Should Montana bark for us?" The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some students cheered, others looked genuinely disturbed. But no one moved to intervene. That's when Marcus heard a voice that cut through the chaos like a blade. "Take your foot off him now." Ashley Martinez stood at the edge of the circle, her book tucked under one arm. She was tiny compared to Dylan and his crew, but something in her voice made the quarterback actually pause. "Excuse me?" Dylan said, turning toward her with amusement. "Did the library mouse just give me an order?" Ashley stepped into the circle, moving with a fluid grace that Marcus recognized immediately. She wasn't just confident, she was dangerous. "I said take your foot off him," Ashley repeated calmly. "Or I'll remove it for you." The crowd rippled with excitement. This was beyond what anyone had expected. Now they had a potential girl versus guy confrontation to add to the drama. Dylan burst out laughing. You're going to make me?" He was at least 8 inches taller than Ashley and outweighed her by 60 pounds. "Sweetheart, you should probably go back to your books before you get hurt." Ashley's expression didn't change. "Last warning." Dylan's amusement turned to irritation. "You know what? Fine, let's give everyone a real show." He took his foot off Marcus's back and stepped toward Ashley with predatory intent. "You want to play the hero? Let's see how tough you really are." Marcus could have acted then. Should have acted. But something told him to wait. Ashley Martinez had just changed the entire dynamic of the situation, and he needed to see how this played out. Dylan reached out to grab Ashley's shoulder, probably planning to humiliate her the same way he had Marcus. But his hand never made contact. Ashley moved like lightning, stepping inside Dylan's reach and driving her elbow into his solar plexus with surgical precision. The quarterback doubled over, gasping for air, his face turning red. The crowd erupted in shocked screams and cheers. Jake Wilson stepped forward angrily, but Ashley had already repositioned herself, balanced on the balls of her feet with her hands raised in a classic martial arts stance. "Anyone else?" she asked calmly. Jake looked confused. His experience was with intimidating kids who were afraid of him, not with someone who clearly knew how to fight. Brett and Tyler hung back, unwilling to engage with someone who just dropped their leader with one move. Dylan slowly straightened up, his face flushed with rage and embarrassment. "You little..." "Careful," Ashley interrupted. "Whatever you're about to say, think real hard about whether you want it recorded and sent to your college recruiters." She gestured at the dozens of phones capturing every moment. Dylan's scholarship prospects flashed before his eyes, and his mouth snapped shut. "Smart choice," Ashley said. She turned to Marcus, who was still on his hands and knees, playing his role. "You okay?" Marcus nodded, climbing slowly to his feet. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did." Ashley's dark eyes were hard as stone. Bullies only understand one language. Dylan had recovered enough to speak, though his voice was still strained. "This isn't over," he wheezed. "You both just made the biggest mistake of your lives." Ashley smiled for the first time, and it was sharp as a knife. "Bring it." She turned and walked away, the crowd parting before her like she was radioactive. Students whispered excitedly, already crafting the story they'd tell about the day. Tiny Ashley Martinez dropped the star quarterback with one shot. Marcus stood in the center of the dispersing crowd, still playing the shaken victim. But his mind was racing with new possibilities. Ashley Martinez had just handed him the perfect opportunity, and she clearly had skills that matched his own. Dylan and his crew retreated, their leader's humiliation complete. The power dynamic at Riverside High had just shifted dramatically, and everyone knew it. As Marcus walked back toward the school building, he caught Ashley's eye across the courtyard. She studied him for a long moment, and he had the distinct feeling that she saw more than he was showing. But she said nothing, just nodded once and disappeared into the crowd. Marcus smiled slightly as he headed to his next class. Phase 1 was complete. Now it was time to see what Phase 2 would bring. The aftermath of Ashley's takedown of Dylan Rodriguez rippled through Riverside High like an earthquake. By third period, 3 different versions of the story were circulating, each more dramatic than the last. Some claimed Ashley had used a secret pressure point technique learned from ancient ninjas. Others insisted she'd broken Dylan's ribs with A single blow. The truth was impressive enough, but high school rumors had a way of growing in the telling. Marcus found himself in an unexpected position. No longer the school's primary target of ridicule, but not quite accepted either. Students who'd laughed at his barking video now looked at him with something approaching pity mixed with curiosity. After all, he was the boy who'd needed rescuing by a girl half his size. It was exactly the cover he needed. During lunch, Marcus deliberately sat at his usual corner table, but this time he wasn't alone. Ashley Martinez had claimed the seat across from him, her martial arts philosophy book open beside a modest turkey sandwich. "We need to talk," she said without looking up from her food. Marcus glanced around nervously, maintaining his act. "About what?" "About the fact that you're not nearly as helpless as you pretend to be." Ashley's voice was quiet, but her words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. "I saw how you positioned yourself before Dylan put his foot on your back. That wasn't random. You were setting up for a countermove." Marcus's carefully neutral expression didn't change, but his pulse quickened. "I don't know what you mean." Ashley finally looked up, her dark eyes sharp and calculating. "Let me put it another way. I've been studying martial arts for 8 years. I can recognize a fighter when I see one, even when they're pretending to be a victim." Before Marcus could respond, Savannah Wells approached their table with the confidence of someone accustomed to inserting herself into any conversation. Today, she wore a powder blue sweater that probably cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe, but her expression was serious. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, though she was already pulling out a chair. "We need to discuss what happened today." Ashley raised an eyebrow. "We?" "Look, I know you two don't know me very well, but I've been watching the social dynamics at this school for 4 years. What Ashley did today was incredible, but it's also going to have consequences." Savannah's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table. "Dylan Rodriguez doesn't just forget when someone embarrasses him in public." Marcus leaned back slightly, letting his posture convey uncertainty. "What kind of consequences?" Savannah exchanged a meaningful look with Ashley. "The kind that could get you both seriously hurt." Dylan's dad, Roberto Rodriguez, owns Rodriguez Construction. They build half the shopping centers in this country. He's also on the school board and donates heavily to the football program. Dylan's basically untouchable. "Nobody's untouchable," Ashley said flatly. "That's where you're wrong." Savannah pulled out her phone and scrolled through several screens. Dylan's been in fights before. 3 different incidents in the past 2 years where other students accused him of assault. Want to know what happened to those complaints? She showed them a series of social media posts. Case 1. Tommy Chun claimed Dylan gave him a concussion during a friendly wrestling match. Tommy's family suddenly got a construction contract worth $50,000, and Tommy transferred to private school. Case 2. Maria Santos said Dylan and his friends cornered her at a party. Her single mom mysteriously got a promotion at the bank where Roberto Rodriguez sits on the board of directors. Case 3. We get the picture, Ashley interrupted. Money talks. Exactly. Which is why what you did today was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Savannah's expression softened slightly. I'm hoping it was brave, because I think it's time someone stood up to him properly. Marcus studied Savannah's face, looking for signs of deception. Why do you care? You're popular, you're safe from all this. Savannah's laugh was bitter. Safe? Dylan Rodriguez has been trying to get me alone for 2 years. The only reason he hasn't succeeded is because my father's law firm handles some very sensitive cases for very powerful people. But even that protection has limits. She lowered her voice. 3 weeks ago, Dylan cornered me after a party. If my friend Jessica hadn't walked in when she did. She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. Ashley's expression hardened. Why didn't you report it? To who? Principal Morrison? She's terrified of the Rodriguez family. The police? Roberto Rodriguez plays golf with the police chief every Thursday. Savannah's hands clenched into fists. The system is designed to protect people like Dylan. Marcus felt a familiar anger building in his chest, the same rage that had fueled his wrestling training after his parents died. But he kept his voice carefully modulated. "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we level the playing field." Savannah leaned forward conspiratorially. "Ashley proved today that Dylan can be beaten. But one victory isn't enough. We need to systematically dismantle his power base." Ashley closed her book with a soft thud. "I'm listening." "Dylan's strength comes from three sources: his athletic status, his father's money, and his crew of followers. Take away any one of those, and he becomes vulnerable. Take away all three ... quotes. Savannah smiled with cold satisfaction. "And he becomes just another high school nobody." Marcus pretended to consider this, though his mind was already racing ahead. "How do we do that?" "We start with his crew," Savannah said. "Jake Wilson, Brett Morgan, and Tyler Hayes. They follow Dylan because he makes them feel powerful and because they're afraid of being on his bad side. But what if following him started to feel dangerous?" Ashley nodded slowly. "You want to turn them against each other." "Exactly. And I know just how to do it." Savannah's smile turned predatory. "Jake Wilson is dating Emma Foster from the drama department. Sweet girl, completely innocent. Jake's been cheating on her with Melissa Park from the cheerleading squad for 3 months. How do you know that?" Marcus asked. "Because Melissa's my cousin, and she tells me everything. She thinks Jake's going to break up with Emma and ask her to prom. But Jake has no intention of leaving Emma. She does his homework for him." Ashley's eyes lit up with understanding. "So if Emma found out about the affair ... she'd be devastated. And Emma's brother David is a senior on the wrestling team. He's also very protective of his little sister." Savannah's grin was sharp. David Foster could snap Jake Wilson in half without breaking a sweat. Marcus felt a thrill of anticipation. This was exactly the kind of strategic thinking he'd hoped to find. "What about Brett and Tyler?" "Brett's the smart one, which makes him the most dangerous. But he's also paranoid about his academic standing. He's been cheating on tests for 2 years, using a system where Tyler sits behind him and taps out answers in code." "You know about that too?" Ashley seemed impressed despite herself. "I know about everything that happens in this school. The question is whether you two are serious about taking Dylan down, or if you're just talking." Marcus exchanged a look with Ashley. He could see the same cold determination in her eyes that he felt building in his own chest. "We're serious. Good." Savannah stood up, smoothing down her sweater. "Meet me in the old music practice room after school, room 237 in the basement. It's been abandoned since they built the new Performing Arts Center. We can plan properly there." After Savannah left, Ashley turned to Marcus with a calculating expression. "She's dangerous. In a good way or a bad way?" "Both. She's exactly the kind of ally we need: smart, connected, ruthless. But she's also the kind of person who'd throw us under the bus if it served her interests." Marcus nodded. "So we use her information but watch our backs." "Agreed." Ashley leaned back in her chair. "There's one more thing we need to discuss." "What's that?" "Your real background. I know you're not some helpless farm boy from Montana. Your stance, your positioning, the way you move when you think no one's watching, you've had serious training." Marcus felt the walls closing in. Ashley was too observant, too skilled to fool indefinitely. "I wrestled a little in Montana. Nothing serious." Ashley's laugh was knowing. "A little?" "Marcus, I've been training in 3 different martial arts since I was 9 years old. I can spot a serious athlete from across a room." "You didn't just wrestle." "A little. You wrestled competitively. Probably at a very high level." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he made a decision that would change everything. State champion, 3 years running. I was being recruited by Division I colleges before my parents died. Ashley's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. I knew it. Why are you hiding it? Because the moment I reveal what I can do, I become a target. Right now, Dylan thinks I'm weak and pathetic. That gives me advantages, such as, he underestimates me. He doesn't see me as a threat. And when the time comes to strike back, he won't see it coming. Ashley smiled a real smile this time, not the sharp blade she'd shown Dylan. I like the way you think. But you should know, you're not the only one with secrets. What do you mean? My father owns Martinez Security Consulting. They provide bodyguards for celebrities and politicians. I've been training with former Special Forces soldiers since I was 10. Ashley's voice carried a quiet pride. What you saw today wasn't even close to my full capabilities. Marcus stared at her with new respect. Why are you at a public high school instead of some elite private academy? Because my parents believe in staying connected to the real world. And because sometimes the best training happens in the field, not in a controlled environment. The pieces were falling into place in Marcus's mind. So when you intervened today, I was testing Dylan's capabilities and yours. Dylan's exactly what he appears to be, a bully who's never faced real opposition. But you double quotes. Ashley's dark eyes were thoughtful. You're a puzzle I'm still figuring out. The lunch bell rang, signaling the end of their conversation. As students began filing out of the cafeteria, Ashley gathered her things. One more question, Marcus said. Why did you really help me today? Ashley paused at the edge of the table. Because bullies like Dylan Rodriguez think they own the world. And because sometimes the world needs to remind them that they don't. That afternoon, Marcus made his way to the basement of the school, navigating through corridors that smelled of industrial cleaner and decades of teenage drama. Room 237 was exactly where Savannah had said it would be, a small practice room with a piano that hadn't been tuned in years and acoustic tiles that had seen better days. Savannah was already there, along with someone Marcus hadn't expected. A tall, lean boy with intelligent eyes and the kind of precise posture that suggested military training. Marcus, this is David Foster, Savannah said by way of introduction. Emma's older brother. David, this is Marcus Thompson, our exchange student. David stepped forward with a firm handshake. Savannah told me what happened today. Also tell me what you're planning. And you're okay with it? Marcus asked. David's expression was grim. Dylan Rodriguez has been terrorizing students at this school for years. What he did to you, what he tried to do to Ashley, it's time someone held him accountable. Ashley arrived a few minutes later, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her demeanor all business. So, she said without preamble, what's the plan? Savannah spread several sheets of paper across the old piano bench. I've been doing research. Dylan's schedule, his crew's schedules, their weaknesses, their fears, everything we need to systematically dismantle their power structure. She pointed to the first sheet. Jake Wilson first. Tomorrow night is Emma's birthday party. Jake promised to be there, but he's actually meeting Melissa Park at the Moonlight Motel on Route 7. I've confirmed this through Melissa. David's jaw tightened. That bastard. The plan is simple, Savannah continued. David, you take Emma to the motel to pick up a surprise gift for her party. Let her see Jake's car in the parking lot. Natural curiosity will do the rest. And then, Ashley asked, then we let human nature take its course. Emma will be heartbroken and angry. David will be furious on his sister's behalf. Jake will find himself isolated from his girlfriend, facing a very angry older brother, and suddenly questioning whether his loyalty to Dylan is worth the trouble. Marcus studied the papers with growing admiration. Savannah had thought of everything timing. logistics, even contingency plans for different scenarios. "What about Brett and Tyler?" he asked. "Brett's the key," Savannah explained. "He's been carrying Tyler academically for 2 years, but he's also been documenting their cheating system, in case he ever needs leverage. I know this because Brett's been trying to sell the information to other students who want to cheat." Ashley frowned. "How does that help us?" "Because," David said with a cold smile, "tomorrow is their AP chemistry test. If that test were to be compromised, and if evidence of their cheating system were to surface at the same time, they'd both be suspended," Marcus finished. "Maybe expelled." "Exactly. And Brett would blame Tyler for being too obvious about the cheating. Tyler would blame Brett for keeping records. Their partnership would implode, taking another piece of Dylan's power base with it." Marcus looked around the room at his new allies. Each of them brought something different to the table: Savannah's intelligence network and strategic thinking, Ashley's combat skills and tactical knowledge, David's protective instincts and military precision. Together, they were formidable. "There's one more thing," Ashley said quietly. "This isn't just about bringing down Dylan anymore. What Savannah told us about his other activities suggests we're dealing with something bigger than high school bullying." Savannah nodded grimly. "I've been tracking patterns for months. Dylan doesn't just target random students. He specifically goes after kids who are isolated, who don't have powerful families or connections. Kids like Marcus." "You think he's done this before?" Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "I think he's done this many times. And I think his father has been covering it up each time." Savannah's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. "Which means we're not just fighting a bully. We're fighting a system that's been protecting predators." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This was bigger than any of them had originally thought. "So what are we?" Ashley asked finally. "Some kind of vigilante group?" David smiled for the first time since entering the room. "I prefer to think of us as a correction service. The system failed to protect students like Marcus and Emma and all the others. So we're going to correct that failure." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since his parents died. For 2 years, he'd been drifting, surviving, letting life happen to him. But now, surrounded by allies who shared his determination, he felt like himself again. "When do we start?" he asked. Savannah checked her watch. "Jake's supposed to meet Melissa at 7 tomorrow night. David, can you get Emma to the motel by 7:15? Consider it done." "And the test situation?" Ashley asked. "I'll handle that." "Tomorrow morning," Savannah said. "I have connections in the administration office." Marcus looked around the circle of determined faces. "What about me? What's my role in all this?" Ashley's smile was sharp and dangerous. "Your job is to keep being the harmless victim everyone thinks you are. At least for now." "Why?" "Because," David said with satisfaction, "the best predators are the ones nobody sees coming." As they filed out of the abandoned practice room, Marcus felt a sense of anticipation building in his chest. For the first time since arriving at Riverside High, he wasn't just reacting to events, he was helping to shape them. Dylan Rodriguez had made the mistake of thinking that power came from intimidation and wealth. He was about to learn that real power came from something much more dangerous, people who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The game was about to change, and Dylan had no idea what was coming. The plan began to unravel at 7:23 p.m. on Thursday evening. David Foster sat in his pickup truck outside the Moonlight Motel, his sister Emma crying silently in the passenger seat. Through the grimy window of room 12, they could clearly see Jake Wilson's distinctive red Mustang convertible, a graduation gift from his wealthy parents. But the room itself was dark, and there was no sign of Jake or Melissa Park. "Maybe they're just late," Emma whispered, though her voice carried no conviction. She'd been suspicious of Jake's excuses for weeks, and seeing his car at a seedy motel was confirmation of her worst fears. David checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Savannah, 2 from Ashley, and a single text from Marcus. Something's wrong. Dylan knows. At that exact moment, 15 miles away at Riverside High, Marcus Thompson was discovering just how wrong things had gone. He'd arrived at the school under the pretense of retrieving a forgotten textbook, but his real purpose was to plant evidence of Brett and Tyler's cheating system in their lockers. Instead, he found himself face to face with Principal Morrison, 2 security guards, and a police officer. "Mr. Thompson," Principal Morrison said with cold formality, "we need to discuss some serious allegations that have been brought to my attention." "I'm not sure what you mean, ma'am," he said, falling back on his practiced persona of confused innocence. "Officer Martinez, no relation to Ashley." Marcus noted stepped forward with a manila folder. "We've received information that you've been planning to vandalize school property and frame other students for academic dishonesty." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not only did they know about the plan, they'd somehow twisted it to make him look like the aggressor. "That's not true. I would never. The evidence suggests otherwise," Principal Morrison interrupted. She gestured to one of the security guards, who produced Marcus's backpack. From it, they pulled items that definitely hadn't been there when he'd left the Patterson house: spray paint cans, a crowbar, and most damning of all, photocopies of test answers with Brett Morgan's name clearly visible at the top. "This is a setup," Marcus said, his carefully maintained facade cracking slightly. "Someone planted this stuff in my bag." Officer Martinez made a note in his pad. "That's what they all say, son. The question is, why would anyone want to frame a quiet exchange student who keeps to himself?" Marcus knew the answer, but saying it would sound like paranoid rambling. Dylan Rodriguez had somehow anticipated their plan and turned it against them. The question was how. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. "Parking lot. Now. Come alone or your friends get hurt too." Marcus showed the message to Principal Morrison. "I think whoever set me up wants to meet." The principal and officer exchanged glances. "This could be our chance to get to the bottom of this," Officer Martinez said, "but you're not going alone." 10 minutes later, Marcus walked across the empty school parking lot with Officer Martinez following at a distance. The autumn evening was crisp, and security lights cast long shadows between the cars. Near the far edge of the lot, by the chain-link fence that separated school property from the adjacent strip mall, a figure waited. Dylan Rodriguez stepped into the light, but he wasn't alone. Brett Morgan and Tyler Hayes flanked him, while Jake Wilson emerged from behind a van with a visibly shaken Emma Foster. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back, and duct tape covered her mouth. "Well, well," Dylan called out loudly enough for Officer Martinez to hear. "If it isn't our little terrorist in training." Marcus felt cold fury building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Let her go, Dylan. Your problem is with me." "Oh, my problem is definitely with you," Dylan replied. "See, I've been doing some research on our exchange student friend here. Did you know that Marcus Thompson was expelled from his last school in Montana for fighting?" It was a lie, but delivered with such conviction that Marcus could see Officer Martinez's expression change. Dylan continued, his voice carrying across the parking lot like a practiced performer. "Turns out our quiet little farm boy has quite the violent streak. 3 different assault charges that were mysteriously dropped when his parents died. Makes you wonder what kind of person we've welcomed into our community." Marcus realized with growing horror that Dylan had crafted the perfect trap. Every word was calculated to paint Marcus as an unstable outsider with a history of violence. The planted evidence in his backpack would seem like confirmation of a pattern of delinquent behavior. "That's not true," Marcus said, but his denial sounded weak even to his own ears. "Isn't it?" Dylan pulled out his phone and played a video that made Marcus's blood run cold. It was security footage from the school's hallway cameras, but the timestamp had been altered. The video showed Marcus entering the building earlier that evening, but edited to make it look like he was carrying the incriminating items that had been found in his backpack. Officer Martinez was already reaching for his radio, probably calling for backup. The situation was spiraling out of control faster than Marcus could process. That's when Ashley Martinez appeared. She came over the chain-link fence like a shadow, moving with inhuman grace and speed. Before anyone could react, she was behind Tyler Hayes with her arm across his throat in a sleeper hold. Tyler went limp in seconds, unconscious but unharmed. "Let the girl go," Ashley said quietly, "or I start breaking bones." Dylan's composure cracked slightly. "You're making this worse for yourselves." "Officer Martinez, arrest them both." But Officer Martinez was staring at Ashley with recognition. "Ashley? What are you doing here?" "Hi, Uncle Roberto," Ashley said without releasing her hold on the unconscious Tyler. "Stopping a kidnapping." "That girl has been taken against her will," Marcus's mind reeled. Ashley was related to the police officer. That explained how she'd appeared so quickly, but it also meant their situation was even more complicated than he'd thought. Dylan's face went pale. "Kidnapping? That's ridiculous. Emma's my friend's girlfriend. We were just what?" Ashley's voice was ice cold. "Just using her as bait to lure my friend into a trap? Just terrorizing a teenage girl to cover up your own crimes?" "Officer." Martinez was reaching for his weapon, but his confusion was obvious. His niece was clearly involved in something serious, but she was also protecting someone who appeared to be a victim. That's when the second trap was sprung. A news van pulled into the parking lot, followed closely by a sleek black sedan. The van bore the logo of Channel 7 News, and Marcus watched in dismay as a reporter and cameraman emerged, setting up for what was obviously a planned broadcast. From the sedan stepped Roberto Rodriguez, Dylan's father, the man who controlled construction contracts and school board decisions throughout the county. He was accompanied by a woman in an expensive suit who was clearly a lawyer. "Officer Martinez," Roberto Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I understand you've apprehended the students responsible for threatening my son." Everything clicked into place for Marcus. This wasn't just a setup, it was a coordinated character assassination, designed to destroy him and anyone who'd allied with him. The news crew was here to broadcast his arrest, cementing his image as a dangerous outsider. Roberto Rodriguez was here to ensure the story was told his way. "Dad," Dylan called out, playing his role perfectly. "They were going to frame Brett and Tyler for cheating, and when I tried to stop them, they grabbed Emma as a hostage." The reporter was already filming, her cameraman capturing every moment of the confrontation. Marcus could see tomorrow's headlines. Forming, violent exchange student terrorizes local high school. Ashley still held the unconscious Tyler, but Marcus could see the calculation in her eyes. Even with her training and family connections, she was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The system was rigged against them. "Ashley," Officer Martinez said, "carefully, put the boy down and step away. We can sort this out at the station." "Uncle Roberto, you don't understand. I understand that you're interfering with a police investigation," her uncle replied, though his voice carried more sadness than anger. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Marcus watched Ashley's shoulders slump slightly as she realized they'd been beaten. She released Tyler, who crumpled to the ground, but was already stirring back to consciousness. Dylan's lawyer stepped forward with a folder thick with documentation. "Officer Martinez, my clients are prepared to file formal charges of assault, vandalism, conspiracy, and kidnapping against both Marcus Thompson and Ashley Martinez." The reporter thrust her microphone toward Marcus. Marcus Thompson, what do you have to say about allegations that you've been planning terrorist activities at Riverside High School? The word terrorist hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus realized that regardless of what happened next, his reputation was destroyed. Even if charges were eventually dropped, the association with terrorism would follow him forever. But as he looked around at the faces surrounding him, Dylan's triumphant smirk, Roberto Rodriguez's cold satisfaction, the reporter's hungry anticipation, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The careful persona he'd maintained since arriving at Riverside High began to crack. "I have something to say," Marcus said quietly. Everyone leaned in slightly, anticipating either a confession or a desperate denial. Instead, Marcus looked directly into the news camera. "Dylan Rodriguez has been systematically bullying and terrorizing students at this school for years. His father has been using money and influence to cover up these crimes. And tonight, they've tried to frame me and my friends for standing up to them." Roberto Rodriguez's face flushed red. "That's slander. Officer Martinez, arrest this boy immediately." But Marcus wasn't finished. "Emma Foster was kidnapped tonight to use as leverage against me. Ashley Martinez risked her own freedom to save her. And in about 30 seconds, you're all going to see proof of everything I'm saying." Dylan's smirk faltered. "What proof?" Marcus smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. "The proof that David Foster has been recording from the roof of the strip mall for the past 20 minutes. On cue, a spotlight illuminated the roof of the adjacent building, where David Foster stood with professional-grade camera equipment. He waved once, then began making his way down a fire escape ladder. Everything that happened here tonight was recorded," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "Dylan's admission that he grabbed Emma, his father's arrival with a news crew, before police backup was even called. The planted evidence that Officer Martinez found in my backpack evidence that wasn't there when I left home tonight." Roberto Rodriguez was already on his phone, probably calling his lawyers and political contacts. But the damage was done. David's recording would show the truth of what had happened. Dylan looked genuinely panicked for the first time. "That's illegal recording. They can't use that." "Actually," Ashley said, standing up and dusting off her hands, "California is a two-party consent state, but there's an exception for recording potential crimes in progress. David had every right to document what he reasonably believed was a kidnapping." Officer Martinez looked between his niece and the unfolding chaos with obvious frustration. "This is turning into a circus. Everyone needs to come to the station so we can sort this out properly." "I don't think so," a new voice said from the darkness. Savannah Wells emerged from behind the news van, but she wasn't alone. Following her were at least a dozen students from Riverside High, all holding their phones and filming everything. "What we have here," Savannah announced in a voice that carried across the parking lot, "is an attempted frame job being carried out by the Rodriguez family to cover up years of systematic abuse." She held up her own phone, showing a live stream that was already being watched by hundreds of viewers. "This entire confrontation has been broadcast live on social media. The whole town is watching." Marcus looked around at the faces of his fellow students, kids who'd watched him bark like a dog in the cafeteria, who'd seen him humiliated and broken. But now they were here, recording everything, bearing witness to the truth. Emma Foster had worked free of her restraints and was running toward her brother David, who'd just reached the ground level. Her testimony about being kidnapped would be crucial evidence. The reporter looked confused, clearly realizing that the story she'd been fed wasn't matching the reality unfolding before her camera. "Mr. Rodriguez, can you comment allegations that this was a coordinated attempt to frame an innocent student?" Roberto Rodriguez's composure finally cracked. "Turn off that camera. This is private property." "Actually," Officer Martinez said with a sigh, "this is school property, which makes it public." And we now have multiple witnesses to what appears to be a very complex situation. Dylan stood in the center of the chaos, his perfect plan collapsing around him. For the first time since Marcus had arrived at Riverside High, the quarterback looked genuinely afraid, but Marcus knew this victory came with a price. Even if they'd exposed Dylan's methods, they'd also revealed their own capabilities. Ashley's fighting skills were now public knowledge. David's surveillance operation showed a level of coordination that suggested planning. Savannah's information network was no longer secret. They'd won this battle, but in doing so, they'd escalated the war to a level none of them had anticipated. As police backup arrived, and the situation devolved into a formal investigation, Marcus caught Ashley's eye. Across the crowd, she nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement that everything had changed. They were no longer unknown students fighting a hidden war against high school bullies. They were now public enemies of one of the most powerful families in the county. And the real fight was just beginning. The investigation that followed the parking lot confrontation lasted 3 weeks and uncovered a web of corruption that shocked even seasoned investigators. What had started as a high school bullying case evolved into a federal inquiry involving human trafficking, political corruption, and organized crime. Marcus sat in the FBI field office in downtown Los Angeles, still processing everything he'd learned. Across from him, Special Agent Patricia Chun, no relation to his literature teacher, reviewed a thick file that contained 2 years' worth of evidence. The Rodriguez family has been operating what we call a feeder system for over a decade. Agent Chun explained. They identify vulnerable teenagers, exchange students, kids from broken homes, anyone without strong family connections, and systematically break them down psychologically. She opened the file to reveal photographs of dozens of young people. These are just the ones we know about. Students who disappeared after being transferred to other schools, runaways who were never properly investigated, kids who aged out of foster care and vanished. Marcus studied the faces, seeing his own story reflected in each one. What happened to them? The lucky ones ended up in low-level criminal enterprises, drug running, theft rings, things like that. The unlucky ones... double quotes. Agent Chun's expression darkened. Human trafficking networks pay premium prices for teenagers who have no families looking for them. Ashley Martinez, who'd been granted special clearance due to her father's security consulting work, leaned forward in her chair. How long have you known about this? We've been investigating the Rodriguez family for 18 months, but we could never get close enough to gather evidence. Roberto Rodriguez has judges, police chiefs, and politicians in his pocket throughout 3 counties. Agent Chun turned to Marcus. Your case was the break we needed. David Foster, sitting beside his sister Emma, spoke up for the first time. You mean Marcus was bait? Not intentionally. But when Dylan targeted him so aggressively, it created an opportunity we couldn't ignore. The public nature of the confrontation forced everything into the open. Emma, who'd been mostly silent since giving her statement about the kidnapping, finally spoke. How many kids could have been saved if you'd acted sooner? Agent Chun's silence was answer enough. Savannah Wells, who'd been coordinating with social media platforms to preserve evidence from the live streams, looked up from her laptop. There's something else. I've been analyzing the financial records that were subpoenaed from Rodriguez Construction. The money trail leads to something called Pacific Renewal Initiative. What's that? Marcus asked. Officially? A nonprofit organization focused on rehabilitating troubled youth. Unofficially? Savannah's fingers flew across her keyboard. It's a front for moving kids out of state and into the trafficking network. Agent Chun nodded. Grimly. Roberto Rodriguez has been using his construction business to launder money while his son identifies and grooms targets. It's sophisticated, well-funded, and it's been operating right under our noses. Marcus felt a familiar cold anger building in his chest. What happens now? Now we finish this, Agent Chun said. But we need your help. She explained the plan. A coordinated operation that would take down not just Dylan and Roberto Rodriguez, but the entire network they'd built. The key was a meeting scheduled for the following weekend, a recruitment event where Pacific Renewal Initiative would be selecting new program participants from troubled teens across the region. Dylan doesn't know we've uncovered the full scope of the operation, Agent Chun continued. He thinks he's just facing assault charges and bad publicity. If we can get him to lead us to the meeting, we can take down everyone involved. Ashley frowned. What's our role in this? You're going to help us set the trap. The Pacific Renewal Initiative retreat was held at a luxury ranch compound in the mountains outside Los Angeles. From the outside, it looked like a legitimate youth development program, modern facilities, professional staff, inspirational banners promising new beginnings. For troubled teens. Marcus approached the main gate with the nervous energy of someone desperate for a second chance. His cover story was perfect. After the terrorist allegations at Riverside High had been debunked, he was struggling with anger issues and looking for help. Dylan Rodriguez, still believing he was in control of the situation, had personally recommended Marcus for the program. Inside the compound, Marcus was processed like all the other participants, background check, psychological evaluation, and, most importantly, signing legal documents that would effectively make him a ward of the Pacific Renewal Initiative. Kids who signed those papers had a way of disappearing into the system. What the organizers didn't know was that Marcus was wearing a wire. Ashley was positioned as an undercover staff member using fake credentials her father's company had provided. And David Foster was coordinating surveillance from a mobile command unit. Disguised as a catering truck, the retreat began innocuously enough. Team-building exercises, group therapy sessions, motivational speakers talking about overcoming adversity. But Marcus noticed the subtle signs of something darker. Doors that locked from the outside, staff members who carried tasers, and the complete absence of any means of communication with the outside world. On the second day, the mask began to slip. Marcus Thompson, a voice called during the afternoon session. Report to the administration building. Marcus found himself in an office that looked more like an interrogation room than a counselor's space. Behind the desk sat a woman he recognized from the FBI files, Dr. Sarah Kellerman, the supposed clinical psychologist who actually ran the trafficking operation. I understand you've been having some difficulties at your new school, Dr. Kellerman said with practiced sympathy. Violence, planning terrorist activities, inability to form healthy relationships. Marcus played his role perfectly, slouching in his chair and avoiding eye contact. I guess everyone thinks I'm some kind of freak. That must be very isolating, very painful. Dr. Kellerman made notes on a tablet. The good news is that we have programs specifically designed for young people in your situation. Fresh starts, new opportunities, a chance to leave your past behind completely. What kind of programs? Work-study opportunities in other states, sometimes in other countries. You'd be completely independent, earning your own way, building a new life far from the prejudices you faced. Marcus recognized the sales pitch from the FBI briefings. This was how they hooked kids promising freedom and independence while actually selling them into slavery. That sounds great, he said with carefully calculated eagerness. When could I start? Very soon. But first, we need to make sure you're truly committed to changing your life. Dr. Kellerman's smile turned predatory. That means cutting all ties to your old existence. Family, friends, even legal documents. Everything that connects you to your past needs to disappear. She produced a stack of papers that Marcus recognized from Agent Chun's warnings. Legal documents that would strip him of his identity and make him effectively property of the organization. Just a few signatures, Dr. Kellerman said, and you can start your new life tomorrow. Marcus pretended to read through the papers, but he was actually buying time. According to the plan, Ashley should be initiating the next phase of the operation right about now. Across the compound, Ashley Martinez was doing exactly that. Using her access as a staff member, she'd planted listening devices throughout the facility and was now systematically documenting the evidence that would destroy the entire operation. More importantly, she was identifying the other kids who'd been brought here, some voluntarily, others under false pretenses, a few who'd clearly been coerced. In the dormitory building, she found what Agent Chun had predicted: teenagers from across the western United States, all with stories similar to Marcus's. Kids from broken homes, aging out of foster care, or like Marcus himself, exchange students with no local family connections. "Listen to me carefully," Ashley whispered to a group of 16 she'd gathered in an empty classroom. "This isn't a rehabilitation program, it's a trafficking operation. In about 10 minutes, federal agents are going to raid this place, and when they do, you need to stay calm and do exactly what they tell you." Some of the kids looked skeptical, but others nodded with the weary understanding of people who'd learned not to trust adults offering help. Meanwhile, David Foster was coordinating the final phase of the operation from his mobile command post. FBI tactical teams were already in position around the compound, waiting for the signal that would bring down the entire network. "All units, this is command," he spoke into his radio. "Target has been engaged. Initiate on my mark." Back in Dr. Kellerman's office, Marcus was running out of ways to stall. The fake signatures wouldn't hold up under legal scrutiny, but they would buy the traffickers enough time to disappear him into their network. "Is there a problem, Marcus?" Dr. Kellerman asked, her patience wearing thin. "These are standard documents. Nothing to be concerned about." "I just want to make sure I understand everything," Marcus said, though his hand was already moving toward the pen. That's when Dylan Rodriguez made his appearance. "Having second thoughts, Montana." Dylan stood in the doorway with his familiar smirk, though something was different about him now. The polished high school quarterback had been replaced by someone harder, more dangerous. "Dr. Kellerman, maybe our friend here needs some additional motivation." Two large men in security uniforms entered behind Dylan, their intentions clear. Marcus realized that his cover had been blown, though he wasn't sure how. "You really thought we were that stupid?" Dylan continued. "A wire, fake staff credentials, surveillance equipment. We found it all hours ago." Dr. Kellerman stood up, her professional facade completely gone now. "The FBI thinks they're so clever, but they don't understand how deep our connections go. We knew about this operation before it even started." Marcus felt his blood run cold. If they'd known from the beginning, that meant Ashley was in danger. The other kids were at risk, and the entire rescue operation was compromised. "Where's Ashley?" he demanded. Dylan's smile was sharp as a knife. "Safe, for now. Along with all the other little do-gooders who thought they could take us down." But Dylan had made a critical error. In his arrogance, he'd assumed that Marcus Thompson was still the helpless victim who'd barked like a dog in the cafeteria. He had no idea that he was facing someone who'd been holding back his true capabilities for months. Marcus stood up slowly, his carefully maintained posture straightening for the first time since arriving at Riverside High. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh," Dr. Kellerman raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "You think I'm the victim in this situation." Marcus's voice had changed completely, carrying an authority that made everyone in the room suddenly tense. "But I'm not the one who needs rescuing." He moved with explosive speed, using wrestling techniques perfected over years of competition. The first security guard went down to a perfectly executed takedown that left him gasping on the floor. The second guard reached for his weapon, but Marcus was already inside his guard, applying a blood choke that rendered him unconscious in seconds. Dylan lunged forward, but he was a football player used to opponents who followed rules and played by established patterns. Marcus was a wrestler trained to adapt and overcome any resistance. Dylan found himself pinned against the wall with Marcus's forearm across his throat. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said calmly. "You're going to tell me where Ashley and the other kids are being held. Then you're going to help me get them out safely. And if you cooperate, maybe I won't let the FBI know that you just confessed to kidnapping a federal officer." Dr. Kellerman was reaching for a panic button, but Marcus's free hand caught her wrist with crushing force. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Outside, the sound of helicopters filled the air as FBI tactical teams moved in. David Foster's voice crackled over hidden speakers throughout the compound. "This is the FBI. The facility is surrounded. All staff and participants move to the main courtyard with your hands visible." Dylan's face had gone pale. "You're insane if you think this is over. My father has connections everywhere. He'll make this all disappear." Marcus smiled for the first time in months, not the careful, neutral expression he'd worn as a cover, but the predatory grin of someone who just cornered his prey. "Your father is currently being arrested at his office by a joint task force. The judges and politicians he's been bribing are being rounded up as we speak. And the evidence we've gathered over the past 3 weeks is going to put your entire organization away for life." He released Dylan, who slumped against the wall in defeat. "It's over, Dylan, all of it." Through the window, Marcus could see FBI agents escorting kids out of the various buildings. Ashley appeared in the courtyard, leading a group of confused but unharmed teenagers toward the medical station that had been set up near the main gate. Dr. Kellerman made one last desperate play, pulling a small pistol from her desk drawer. But Marcus had been expecting something like this. He disarmed her with a technique that his wrestling coach had taught him years ago, sending the weapon spinning across the room. Federal agents. The door burst open as FBI tactical officers flooded the room. "Hands where we can see them." Marcus stepped back with his hands raised, letting the professionals take over. Dylan and Dr. Kellerman was quickly handcuffed and read their rights, while Marcus was escorted outside for debriefing. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood at the podium in Riverside High's auditorium, looking out at an audience that included his fellow students, faculty, federal investigators, and representatives from 3 different news organizations. The transformation in the school was remarkable. Principal Morrison had been replaced by someone actually committed to student safety. The culture of fear and intimidation that had dominated social interactions had been replaced by genuine efforts to create an inclusive environment. Most importantly, the systems that had allowed predators like Dylan Rodriguez to operate freely had been dismantled and rebuilt. "When I first arrived at Riverside High," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "I thought I was just trying to survive my senior year and get into college. I never imagined I'd become part of something that would change everything." In the front row, Ashley Martinez sat with her father, who'd been instrumental in coordinating the security aspects of the FBI operation. David and Emma Foster sat nearby, their family stronger than ever after surviving the trauma of the trafficking ring. Savannah Wells, who'd been accepted to MIT, based partly on her investigation work, smiled encouragingly from her seat near the stage. "The Rodriguez trafficking network," Marcus continued, "operated for over a decade because good people convinced themselves that what they were seeing wasn't really happening. That the missing kids, the unexplained transfers, the pattern of vulnerable students disappearing, that it was all just coincidence." He paused, looking directly at the news cameras. "But there are no coincidences when it comes to predators. There are only people who choose to look away and people who choose to act." The final statistics were staggering. 47 arrests across 6 states, including judges, police officers, school administrators, and business leaders. Over 200 victims were identified and rescued. A human trafficking network worth an estimated $50 million was completely destroyed. Dylan Rodriguez had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His father, Roberto, received Life without parole. Dr. Kellerman and 12 other key figures in the organization would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. But for Marcus, the most important changes were the ones that couldn't be measured in arrests or convictions. "I learned something important during my time at Riverside High," he said as his speech drew to a close. "Strength isn't about being the toughest person in the room. It's about using whatever capabilities you have to protect people who can't protect themselves." After the ceremony, Marcus found himself surrounded by reporters asking about his plans for the future. He'd been accepted to Stanford University on a full scholarship, not for wrestling, though he'd decided to join the team, but for his work in exposing the trafficking network. "What's next for you?" one reporter asked. Marcus looked around at his friends, his allies, the people who'd stood with him when everything was at stake. "I'm going to study criminology and law enforcement. Someone needs to make sure this kind of thing never happens again." Ashley approached as the crowd began to disperse. "So the helpless farm boy from Montana is going to become a federal agent?" Marcus laughed, a genuine sound of happiness that would have been unimaginable during his first weeks at Riverside High. "Something like that. What about you?" "My father's expanding his security consulting business. Turns out there's a big demand for people who can identify and neutralize trafficking operations." Ashley's smile was sharp with anticipation. "I think I've found my calling." David Foster joined them, Emma at his side. "The military academy wants me to develop training programs based on what we learned here. How to recognize predatory organizations, how to coordinate multi-agency responses, that kind of thing." Emma, who'd struggled with trauma in the months following her kidnapping, looked stronger than she had in weeks. "I'm starting a support group for trafficking survivors. The FBI says there are hundreds of kids who'll need help rebuilding their lives." Savannah appeared with her arms full of college brochures and acceptance letters. "MAT wants me to help develop algorithms for identifying trafficking networks through social media patterns. Apparently, my investigation techniques impressed some very important people." Marcus looked around at the group that had started as a desperate alliance against high school bullies and evolved into something that had taken down one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations on the West Coast. "You know what's funny?" he said. "Dylan thought he was hunting me. He had no idea that I was actually hunting him." Ashley nodded thoughtfully. "The best predators are the ones nobody sees coming." "Speaking of which," Savannah said with a mischievous glint in her eye, "I've been analyzing some interesting patterns in the juvenile justice system in Northern California." "Want to know what I found?" Marcus groaned. "Savannah, we just finished taking down one criminal organization. Can we have, like, a week off before starting the next investigation?" "Evil doesn't take breaks," Ashley said with mock seriousness. "Neither do we." As they walked out of the auditorium together, Marcus reflected on how completely his life had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been a broken kid from Montana trying to stay invisible and survive his senior year. Now he was part of a team that had proven they could take on corruption at the highest levels and win. The boy who'd been forced to bark like a dog in the cafeteria was gone forever. In his place stood someone who understood that true strength came not from individual prowess, but from the bonds forged with people who shared your commitment to justice. Dylan Rodriguez had made the mistake of thinking that humiliation would break Marcus Thompson. Instead, it had revealed exactly what he was made of, and that had been Dylan's final fatal error. Outside Riverside High, as the sun set over the California mountains, Marcus Thompson and his allies began planning their next mission. Because predators like the Rodriguez family weren't unique, they existed in schools and communities across the country, protected by systems designed to shield the powerful from consequences. But now they faced opposition they'd never encountered before. Teenagers who refused to be victims, who'd learned to fight back with intelligence, coordination, and an unshakable commitment to protecting the innocent. The war was far from over, but for the first time, The good guys were winning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.